A wealthy man's fake engagement with a poor black woman. You won't believe what happened next. Daniel Collins, a wealthy businessman, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office. The sprawling cityscape below had always been a source of pride and accomplishment for him, yet today, as he looked out, he felt a peculiar emptiness gnawing at him. The satisfaction he usually drew from the view seemed distant, almost hollow. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. "Mr. Collins, your 2 appointment has arrived." Daniel sighed and adjusted his designer tie, a gesture of habitual send then. The glass door to his office swung open, and 2 men in sharp, tailored suits entered. Daniel recognized them as representatives from a significant government contract he had been eyeing for months. He greeted them with a cool, controlled demeanor. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" The older of the 2 men cleared his throat before speaking. "Mr. Collins, we've reviewed your proposal and we're impressed with your company's capabilities." Daniel allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, but remained cautious, sensing there was more to the story. The younger man stepped forward, continuing, "However, we have some concerns about your public image. The government is looking for partners who are not only financially successful, but also relatable." Daniel's brow furrowed at the unfamiliar term. "Relatable?" The older man nodded. "Yes. Family-oriented, community-minded, someone the public can trust and connect with." The words felt foreign to Daniel, who had always considered his personal life irrelevant to his business success. He struggled to see how his public image could impact his business dealings. "I see," he said, his voice tight. "And how do you suggest I address this concern?" The men exchanged glances before the younger one spoke up. "Perhaps some public appearances with family, charity work, anything to show you're more than just a businessman." As the meeting concluded and the representatives left, Daniel sank into his leather chair, staring at the framed magazine covers on his wall. Each one declared him a titan of industry, but today they seemed to only emphasize a growing emptiness. His phone buzzed with a message from his sister, asking if he would be attending their niece's dance recital. Daniel had always declined such invitations, deeming them a waste of time. But now, faced with the prospect of transforming his public image, he hesitated. Maybe it was time for a change, not just for the contract, but for himself. The thought both terrified and intrigued him. In his office, surrounded by advisors, Daniel listened to a tense discussion about his public image problem. His PR manager, Sarah, spoke hesitantly. "Sir, we've been brainstorming ideas to soften your public persona." Daniel raised an eyebrow, signaling her to continue. "Go on." Sarah took a deep breath. "We think you need a fiancé." The room fell silent. Daniel's face remained impassive, but his mind raced with skepticism. "A fiancé?" he echoed. "Explain." Sarah gained confidence as she continued. "A loving relationship would show the public a softer side of you. It could make you appear more relatable, more human." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. Relationships had always seemed like unnecessary distractions to him, but this situation could be different. "You're suggesting I find someone to play a role?" he asked flatly. His team exchanged uneasy glances. "Not exactly," said Tom, the CFO. "We were hoping you might—" No, Daniel cut him off. "I see the merit in your suggestion, but I have no interest in a real relationship." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to the team. "This is simply another business transaction," he mused, almost to himself. "We'll hire someone, an actress perhaps, who can convincingly play the part of a loving fiancé." His team looked shocked, but Daniel was already considering the possibilities. He turned back to face them, his expression determined. "Set it up. Find me a suitable candidate, someone intelligent, poised, and able to keep up with our world. And make sure they understand this is strictly business." As his team scrambled to take notes and make plans, Daniel felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. This was just another move in the game of business, he told himself, nothing more. Yet, as he dismissed his team and sat alone in his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into uncharted territory. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. Later that day, Daniel's sleek black car pulled up to the curb outside his towering office building. As he stepped out, his eyes swept the familiar street. That's when he saw her again. Lila Brooks, a woman of African descent, standing behind a small table. Her dark hands were carefully arranging colorful handmade crafts. Daniel had noticed her many times before, but had never paid much attention to her. Today was different. As he watched her smile warmly at a customer, an idea began to form in his mind. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," his assistant greeted him at the building entrance. Daniel nodded absently, his gaze still fixed on Lila. "That woman," he said, pointing towards her. "What do you know about her?" His assistant looked surprised. "Not much, sir. Her name is Lila Brooks. She sells handmade crafts here most days." Daniel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Find out everything you can about her." Throughout the day, Daniel found himself distracted, his thoughts returning repeatedly to Lila. He wondered if she could be the solution to his problem. As the sun began to set, Daniel left his office and walked towards Lila's table. Lila was putting her things away at the end of the day, carefully packing her unsold items into a worn cardboard box. Daniel, a man she knew from before, came over and spoke more softly than usual. Lila looked up, surprised, her warm brown eyes wide. "Hello, I'm Daniel Collins," he said, reaching out his hand. Lila raised her eyebrows as she shook his hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Collins. Your building is so big it makes my little table look tiny," she said with a small smile. Daniel felt a strange feeling in his chest at her words, but tried to ignore it. He had something important to say. "I have a business offer for you," Daniel said carefully. Lila tilted her head, her curiosity growing. "A business offer for me?" Daniel nodded. He was thinking that Lila could play the role of his fiancée without making things complicated. He realized she could benefit from this arrangement. "Yes," he said, gaining more confidence. "I think we can help each other. I'd like to offer you a job. It's unusual, but it could be very helpful for both of us." Lila's eyes widened in surprise. "A job? What kind of job?" Daniel glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé for the next 10 months. It's for business reasons," he explained quickly when he saw Lila's shocked expression. Lila took a step back, confused. "Pretend to be your fiancé? I don't understand." Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I need to look better for an important contract. Having a fiancé would help. I'm willing to pay you a lot of money for your time and to keep this a secret." Lila's hand shook a little as she closed her box of crafts. "How much are we talking about?" Daniel named an amount that made Lila's eyes go even wider. It was more money than she had ever seen. "That's a lot of money," Lila whispered, her mind racing. Daniel nodded. "Yes, and it could be yours. All you need to do is go to some events with me, smile for photos, and nothing more. I promise." Lila bit her lip, thinking hard. The money could help her pay off her debts and maybe save the community arts center that was almost closing. But pretending to be engaged to someone she didn't know well made her nervous. "I don't know, Mr. Collins. This is a lot to think about." Daniel's face was serious, but inside he felt a bit desperate. "I understand it's a big decision. Take some time to think it over. I'll give you my card, and you can let me know in a day or two." Lila nodded, taking the card from him. "Okay, I'll think about it." As Daniel walked away, Lila looked at the card, feeling a mix of excitement and worry. The offer was tempting, but she wasn't sure if she could pretend to be engaged to Daniel Collins. When she got home, she saw her dusty easel in the corner. She hadn't used it in months. She remembered the joy of her first art show and her parents' proud faces. But now, with bills piling up and rent to pay, she had put aside her art for more practical work. Sitting on her old couch, Lila took out Daniel's card. The money he offered could solve many of her problems, help her pay debts, and even save the community art center. But pretending to be engaged to someone like Daniel Collins made her feel uneasy. He was so different from the warm, creative people she was used to. Lila thought about the families in her neighborhood and the children who loved painting. The money could help them too. It's just for a few months, she told herself. I can do this for them and for my future. With trembling hands, she called the number on the card. Her heart raced as it rang. Mr. Collins, it's Lila Brooks. I've made my decision. I'll do it. I'll be your fiancé. The next morning, Lila was in Daniel's fancy office, sitting on an expensive leather chair. Daniel was across from her, looking at a contract. Let's go over the terms again, he said. You'll act as my fiancé for 10 months. You'll go to events with me, be seen together, and support my image as a family-oriented person. Lila nodded, holding her hands in her lap. In return, Daniel said, you'll get a good monthly payment and a bonus when the arrangement ends. We'll cover all expenses for our public appearances. Lila took a deep breath. I have some conditions. I won't lie about who I am or where I come from, and I need time off for my community work at the art center. Daniel seemed like he might argue, but then agreed. We'll work around your schedule. As they finished the contract, Lila felt both hope and worry. This was her chance to help her community and get ahead, but Daniel's coldness reminded her it was just business to him. One last thing, Lila said as they neared the end of the contract. When this is over, we go our separate ways, no strings attached. Daniel's lips curled slightly, almost in a smile. Believe me, Miss Brooks, that won't be a problem. As they both signed the contract, Lila wondered what she was getting into, but the thought of returning to her art and helping the community gave her strength. Daniel stood up and extended his hand. Welcome aboard, Miss Brooks, or should I say, my dear fiancé. Lila shook his hand, forcing a smile. I guess you should, Mr. Collins. The next evening, Lila stood with Daniel in a big, fancy room with sparkling lights and people wearing fancy clothes. Lila felt nervous in her borrowed dress. Daniel whispered to her, Remember to smile and nod. Let me talk. Lila nodded, feeling her heart beat fast as they walked over to a group of well-dressed men. One of the men said, So this is the lucky lady we've heard about. Daniel put his arm around Lila and said, Yes, meet my fiancée, Lila Brooks. Lila tried to smile confidently, even though she felt shy. She said, Nice to meet you all, her voice very soft. While Daniel talked about business and investments, Lila noticed people looking at her with curiosity. Some people seemed friendly, but others looked doubtful. She overheard whispers like, Where did he find her? And she's so different from his usual type. What does she see in him? Lila's cheeks got red, but she held her head up high. Even if she didn't fit in, she wouldn't let anyone make her feel small. Later that week, Daniel took Lila to a work meeting. She sat quietly beside him, feeling everyone's eyes on her. During a break, a woman asked, Daniel says you're an artist. How interesting. How did you two meet? Lila started to answer, but Daniel jumped in, saying, Her talent caught my eye. She brings a fresh perspective to my life. The woman raised an eyebrow, but didn't say much. As they left, Lila overheard two men talking, saying things like, It won't last, and this is just for show. Lila felt upset hearing this, even though she knew it was all an act. She looked at Daniel, who seemed unaffected. In quiet moments between events, Lila found peace in her art. Even though her hands were softer now, the passion in her heart was still strong. One day, while Daniel worked in his office, Lila set up her art supplies on the balcony. She started drawing, thinking about the community art center she missed and the kids she used to help. She felt guilty for not visiting recently. To keep her skills sharp, she tried new art techniques like resin art and alcohol ink painting. In the evenings, while Daniel was busy, she practiced these methods, creating colorful pieces that showed her feelings. One day, Daniel walked in and saw her working on a paper quilling project. He seemed surprised and said, "I didn't know you could do that." Lila smiled and replied, "There's a lot you don't know about me." For a moment, Daniel's eyes showed curiosity, but it quickly vanished. He nodded and left the room. As time passed, Lila felt torn between two worlds, being Daniel's perfect fiancée and being the passionate artist she really was. She clung to her art as a reminder of her true self. Daniel's family hosted a big dinner party, and Lila stood by Daniel, feeling nervous in her fancy dress. She took a deep breath and reminded herself she belonged there, even if it was pretend. When they entered the dining room, Daniel's mother, a serious woman with silver hair, came over. She looked Lila up and down and said, "So this is the woman who's won my son's heart." Lila smiled warmly and shook her hand, saying, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Collins. Daniel has told me so much about you." To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Collins smiled a little. Throughout the evening, Lila impressed Daniel's family and friends with her genuine warmth. She shared stories about her community work and her love for art. Daniel watched her, nodding with approval. His cousin James asked him, "She's quite something, isn't she?" "Where did you say you met her?" Daniel said smoothly, "At a charity event. Her work caught my attention." James raised an eyebrow but didn't say more. As the party went on, Lila chatted with Daniel's sister Emily, and they bonded over their love for art. Emily asked if Lila could show her work and teach her some things. Lila was excited about this new connection and said she'd love to. Across the room, Daniel watched with satisfaction, pleased that Lila was doing well and making a good impression. As the party ended, a man with gray hair and a sharp suit came up to them. He introduced himself as Senator Johnson and said he'd heard good things about Lila and Daniel. Daniel recognized him as an important person for their business. Daniel was trying to stay calm as he shook the man's hand. "It's nice to meet you, Senator," he said smoothly. "I hope you're having a good time." Lila smiled and touched Daniel's arm. The senator looked at them closely and said, "You make a lovely couple. How long have you been together?" Daniel started to sweat because he didn't expect this question. Lila, sensing his worry, quickly answered, "We feel like we've known each other forever, but we've been together for about 6 months now." The senator smiled and said, "Young love is so nice. My wife and I have been married for 40 years. We should all have dinner together sometime. I'd love to hear more about you." Daniel's heart raced. A dinner with the senator could help him with his work. He smiled and said, "We'd love to, Senator," while putting his arm around Lila. After the senator left, Daniel took Lila to a quiet corner, looking worried. "This is getting tricky," he whispered. "We need to be even better at pretending now. The senator is very important." Lila nodded, feeling nervous. "I understand," she said. "We'll make it work. Maybe we should spend more time together to make it seem more real." Daniel was unsure but agreed. He knew they needed to be perfect. As they went back to the party, Daniel felt the pressure. Their pretend relationship was now very important. Over the weeks, Lila got more involved in Daniel's world. Charity events, business dinners, and fancy parties became normal for her. She learned to fit in with the rich people. One sunny day, Lila went with Daniel to a community event. In the park, she saw some kids painting and went over to see. A friendly woman said, "We're from the art center. We're helping kids paint." Lila's heart felt happy. She sat down next to a little girl and asked if she could help. The girl gave her the brush, and Lila helped paint a beautiful picture. The little girl was amazed and said, "You're really good at this." Daniel watched from far away, surprised at how much Lila was enjoying herself. Lila was thrilled as she left the park. She couldn't stop talking about the art center, where they were doing wonderful work. Daniel, however, was only half listening, distracted by his phone as he checked for important emails. But Lila was bubbling with excitement. Over the next few days, she couldn't stay away from the art center. She began volunteering there, teaching kids basic art techniques. The familiar smell of paint and the feel of canvas under her fingers reminded her of something she thought she had lost a long time ago. One evening, as Lila prepared for another fancy event with Daniel, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. She was dressed in a beautiful gown, her hair perfectly styled, but as she looked at her reflection, she felt a strong urge to hold a paintbrush. Her mind was full of images she wanted to create. She felt torn between her passion for art and her commitment to Daniel. She loved the work she was doing at the art center. The joy of creating and inspiring others made her feel alive, yet she also knew how important her role was in Daniel's life, providing financial stability. Lila took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. She had promised to support Daniel, and she intended to keep that promise. But as she left for the event, her heart felt heavy with the weight of her rekindled passion and the uncertainty of her future. Daniel noticed Lila's growing enthusiasm for the community art center. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about the kids' progress, and she often hurried off after their public appearances to volunteer there. At first, he thought it was just part of her show. But as the days passed, he began to question her motives. One evening, after a charity gala, Daniel decided to address his concerns. They were sitting in his luxurious penthouse when he said, "Lila, I've noticed you're spending a lot of time at that art center. Is there something I should know?" Lila's face lit up at the mention of the art center. "Oh, Daniel, it's wonderful. The kids are so talented and they're learning so much. I feel like I'm making a real difference." Daniel frowned, not quite understanding her excitement. "But what's the point? It doesn't bring in any money. Shouldn't you be focusing on our arrangement?" Lila's smile faltered. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "It's not about money, Daniel. Art is about expression, creativity, and joy. It feeds the soul in a way that money can't." Daniel scoffed and shook his head. "Feeds the soul, Lila? That's impractical. In this world, you need financial stability to succeed. These kids would be better off learning business skills. But art can lead to success too," Lila argued, her voice soft but passionate. "It teaches problem solving, boosts confidence, and opens up new ways of thinking. It's not just about making pretty pictures." Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "That's all well and good, but it doesn't pay the bills. I thought you understood the importance of financial security. Isn't that why you agreed to this arrangement in the first place?" Lila fell silent, hurt by Daniel's cold logic. She realized that despite their time together, he still didn't understand her values or the joy she found in art. The gap between them suddenly felt wider than ever. Lila's heart sank as she looked at Daniel. His cold, calculating eyes showed no understanding of her passion for art. She felt a wave of frustration and sadness wash over her. For the first time since their arrangement began, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Daniel," she said softly, "there's more to life than just making money. The art center brings joy to those kids. It gives them hope and a chance to express themselves." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Hope doesn't pay rent. I thought you of all people would understand that." His words stung, reminding Lila of her own struggles with money. She turned away, blinking back tears. "I do understand," she whispered, "but I also know that money isn't everything." For a moment, silence hung heavily between them. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel's expression softened. He reached out and gently touched Lila's arm. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice losing its usual sharp edge. "I didn't mean to upset you. It's just that I've always believed success is measured by financial gain. It's hard for me to see it any other way." Lila looked up, surprised by this glimpse of vulnerability. For a brief moment, she saw past Daniel's tough exterior to the man beneath, a man who might have never known the joy of creating something beautiful just for the sake of it. "Maybe," she hesitated, "you could come to the art center sometime and see for yourself what it means to those kids." Daniel's brow furrowed, but he didn't immediately dismiss the idea. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. As Lila watched him, she realized that there might be more to Daniel than she had initially thought. Behind his businessman facade, there was a person capable of change and growth. It didn't erase her frustration or doubts about their arrangement, but it did give her a glimmer of hope. As days went by, Daniel and Lila started having more fights. Daniel was worried that Lila didn't care enough about the art center. Lila had to explain her love for it more and more. One evening, while getting ready for a fancy event, Daniel said, "Lila, you could be meeting people who might buy your art, but you're spending time with kids who can't pay." Lila took a deep breath to stay calm and said, "Not everything is about money. These kids need a place to express themselves and dream." Daniel just shrugged and said, "Dreams don't pay bills." Lila replied firmly, "Dreams give life meaning, which I think you've forgotten." Daniel looked surprised by Lila's strong feelings. He said quietly, "I just don't get how you can put so much into something that doesn't make money." Lila's face softened. She said, "The return isn't always money. Sometimes it's in the kids' smiles and their pride when they create something beautiful. That's worth more than money to me." Daniel shook his head, not fully understanding but feeling touched by her words. He said, "I guess we see things differently." Lila agreed. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. We might learn from each other." As they went to the event, Lila played her part as Daniel's fiancée, smiling for the cameras and chatting with his friends. But now there was a new sparkle in her eyes. She talked more about her work at the art center, surprising Daniel's friends with her enthusiasm. At the art center's fundraising event, Lila was nervous but excited. She wore a simple dress, unlike many of the fancy outfits around her. Daniel was at the back, checking his watch, only there because Lila said it was important for their image. When the crowd settled, Lila took the stage and looked at Daniel. She took a deep breath and started her speech. She said, "Art isn't just pretty pictures. It helps heal hearts and bring people together." As Lila spoke, she shared stories of how art gave hope to children and joy to elderly people. Her words showed how art changed lives. She said that when a child picks up a paintbrush, they are not just making art. They are building confidence and discovering their voice. Daniel leaned in, moved by Lila's sincerity, and watched as the crowd was touched by her words. When Lila finished, everyone clapped and stood up. Daniel was surprised to feel emotional. The next day, Lila asked Daniel to visit the art center. She said it would mean a lot to everyone there. Daniel hesitated, thinking about his busy schedule, but Lila's pleading eyes convinced him. He agreed to come for 1 hour. The next afternoon, they went to the art center. It wasn't as fancy as the galleries Daniel knew. The building was old and peeling in places, but it felt warm. As they walked in, they heard happy laughter and chatter. Lila showed Daniel the rooms, where kids were happily making colorful, messy art. Lila whispered to Daniel and gently nudged him. Daniel looked at the children and saw how happy they were. One little girl proudly showed her painting and said, "I made a rainbow." She had a big, gap-toothed smile. In another room, there were some older people working on a big mural. They moved slowly but carefully, adding to the pretty picture on the wall. Lila explained that some of these people hardly left their homes before joining this program. Now they come every week and find friendship and purpose. Daniel saw an old man helping his friend mix colors, and they both laughed at a joke. The sense of community was strong, and Daniel felt something in his chest as he watched. As Daniel continued the tour, he saw people of all ages working together. There were teenagers helping younger kids, adults finding their creativity again, and even some veterans making sculptures. "This is more than just art," Daniel said, surprised. Lila nodded and said, "It's healing, connection, and hope." For the first time, Daniel understood why Lila was so passionate. The happiness and fulfillment at the center were clear. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about human connection and self-expression. As they were about to leave, Daniel watched a young boy finishing his painting. The child's focus and pride touched something in Daniel. He kept thinking about the art center and the joy he saw there. He decided to visit again to understand Lila better. This time, Daniel showed up unexpectedly. He felt a bit out of place in his fancy suit, but Lila was happy to see him. She invited him to join a pottery class. Before he knew it, Daniel was at a pottery wheel, making something with clay. He was surprised to enjoy it. The concentration helped him forget about work. Over the weeks, Daniel visited the art center more often. He tried painting, sculpture, and even joined a mural project. The regulars started to recognize him and greeted him warmly. One afternoon, while helping kids with their art, Daniel realized something had changed. The purpose he felt at the center was different from his work in the office. It wasn't about deals or profits. It was about connection and making a difference. Daniel saw Lila helping everyone and sharing in their excitement. Her passion and joy made him smile more. The art center was a special place where people could come together and feel like they belonged. As the weather got warmer, Lila and Daniel spent more time together outside. One evening, they sat on a park bench, watching the sunset. Lila was drawing in her notebook, and Daniel asked her how long she'd been an artist. Lila's eyes lit up as she told him she had been drawing since she was little, using crayons and paper during church. She had dreamed of having gallery shows and making a living from her art, but life had other plans. Daniel listened closely and felt a new emotion in his chest, maybe admiration. Lila looked at Daniel and said, "Sometimes I wanted to quit, but when I picked up my brush or pencil, I remembered why I can't. Art isn't just something I do, it's who I am." Daniel looked at Lila differently now. He saw how determined she was and how passionate she was about her art. It made him respect her a lot. Daniel told her softly, "You're stronger than I thought." Lila smiled, touched by his words, and said, "We all have strengths. Sometimes they are different than we expect." As they sat together, the sunset painted the sky with beautiful colors. Daniel realized that Lila's strong will and love for art were making him think differently about success and happiness. Even though he still didn't fully understand why her art was so important, he admired her more and more. In the following weeks, Daniel started visiting the community art center more often. What began as a visit to please Lila turned into something surprising. He began to see the art center as a place full of hope for the community. One day, Daniel watched a children's art class. He saw the kids' happy faces and their hands covered in paint as they made colorful pictures. A little girl with pigtails showed him her painting of a rainbow, and Daniel was touched. He told her it was beautiful and praised her art. Later, Daniel saw Lila across the room, and her smile made him feel something special inside. That week, Daniel met with his financial advisors and said he wanted to give a lot of money to the art center. They were surprised, but Daniel kept coming to the center. He helped with everything from organizing supplies to painting walls. He felt a joy from these simple acts that he had never felt in his tough business world. One Saturday, while helping set up for an art fair, Daniel looked around and saw how busy everyone was. Lila was directing things with lots of energy. Daniel felt a warm, happy feeling inside that he didn't fully understand. Lila noticed him and teased, "You're really getting into this." Daniel laughed and admitted, "I guess I am. I didn't know helping could feel so good." Lila touched his arm and said, "That's the magic of community. When we give, we often get back even more." As time passed, Lila and Daniel spent more time together outside of their planned meetings. What started as a business deal was slowly becoming something more. After a successful fundraising event, they took a walk in the park. Daniel told Lila she was amazing and that her words about art were inspiring. Lila felt happy, and thanked him. They walked side by side, their hands brushing and feeling a spark, but they didn't say anything about it. Daniel opened up to Lila and said, "I used to think art was just a waste, but now I see how it brings people together and gives them hope. It's changed me." Lila felt her heart warm and told him, "I'm glad you see it differently now. Art can heal, inspire, and connect us." They stopped on a small bridge and looked at the pond below, where the water reflected the beautiful colors of the sky. Daniel looked at Lila with a serious but gentle face. "Lila, I want you to know how thankful I am for everything you've shown me. This arrangement has become so much more than I ever thought it could be." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She saw how sincere Daniel was and felt something deep inside her. "I feel the same way," she said softly, unsure how to explain her feelings. Daniel moved closer and gently took her hand. Their fingers touched and they felt a warm connection. They stood quietly, watching the sunset, not wanting to break the special moment between them. As they walked back, holding hands, they both knew their relationship had become something more real and valuable than they ever expected. With the government contract deadline coming up, Daniel sat in his office, looking out at the busy city. But his thoughts were not on the contract anymore. Instead, he thought about Lila and the art center. He picked up a small clay sculpture from his desk, a gift from a child at the center. The sculpture's funny shape and bright colors made him smile. A few months ago, he might have thought it was worthless, but now it was very special to him. His phone buzzed with a reminder about a meeting with the government officials. He sighed, realizing his heart wasn't in it anymore. The contract, which once seemed so important, now felt empty compared to the joy he found at the art center. He remembered Lila's happy smile during art classes, the children laughing and making art, and the strong sense of community at the center. These memories made Daniel feel something new, a sense of purpose beyond just making money. He stood by the window, watching people walk by, and realized he didn't want to be the cold businessman he used to be. The impact he was having at the art center, the lives he was touching, and his true connection with Lila were what mattered most to him now. In the conference room, Daniel's team noticed he seemed different lately. Mr. Collins, his chief of staff, asked, "We've noticed you've been different. Are you still committed to the government contract?" Daniel saw his team's worried faces and felt guilty because their jobs depended on him. But he couldn't ignore the change inside him. "Of course I'm committed," he said firmly, though his voice lacked its usual strength. His team looked relieved, but Daniel's inner struggle grew. He thought about Lila's warm smile and the children's proud faces at the art center. These memories stirred new emotions in him. During the meeting, Daniel's mind wandered. He nodded and made comments, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew his relationship with Lila was more than just business. It was real and important. After the meeting, Daniel went to his office and looked at the photos of Lila arranged by his PR team. The staged pictures seemed shallow compared to their real moments at the art center. Daniel felt the weight of his internal struggle. He had always made decisions based on logic and profit, but now his heart and mind were in conflict. Meanwhile, Lila sat on the soft sofa in Daniel's penthouse, tracing patterns on a pillow. She looked out at the city lights, feeling confused. Lately, Daniel's cold behavior had softened, and he seemed genuinely interested in the art center and her work. But Lila wondered if his new warmth was just a trick to secure the government contract. After all, their relationship started as a business deal. Lila's heart fluttered as she remembered how Daniel helped paint a mural at the center. Last weekend, Daniel's normally clean suit got covered in bright colors, and he laughed a real laugh when a little girl accidentally got paint on his cheek. Lila wondered to herself if it was all fake. She stood by the window, looking out at the busy city below. She felt torn between her feelings for Daniel and their situation. Lila asked herself, what if Daniel went back to being the cold businessman she first met after everything was over? She felt sad and a bit scared. Lila had always been strong and independent, but she realized that she cared for Daniel more than she wanted to admit. It hurt to think it might all be pretend. She took a deep breath to calm herself, remembering why she agreed to this arrangement, to make sure she had money for the future and to help the art center. But now, in Daniel's fancy apartment, her heart was confused. The night of the big event arrived, and Lila was in front of a mirror, fixing her blue gown. She was nervous about the important night. Daniel came in looking sharp in his tuxedo and asked if she was ready. Lila nodded, trying to smile, and said, "As ready as I'll ever be." They went to the grand ballroom, where Mr. Harrison, a government official, welcomed them. Mr. Harrison seemed very interested in them and asked a lot of questions about their relationship. Lila felt nervous, knowing that how well they performed that night could decide if Daniel got the contract. Mr. Harrison asked how they met, and Daniel told a made-up story with Lila by his side. During a slow dance, Lila told Daniel that Mr. Harrison looked suspicious. Daniel said they needed to be more convincing and held her close. Lila enjoyed the moment, forgetting that it was all an act. When Mr. Harrison came over, he told them they made a lovely couple and was impressed with how well they got along. Lila felt her face get warm, unsure if it was from the compliment or Daniel's intense gaze. Daniel said that Lila made him better, and Lila was surprised by how sincere he sounded. As the night went on, Lila worried about keeping up their act, but she saw Daniel couldn't stop looking at her. He admired how Lila was charming everyone with her genuine kindness. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest as he realized that what had started as a simple business arrangement with Lila had grown into something much more significant. He had tried to keep his feelings in check, pretending that they were all part of the act, but now the weight of pretending had become unbearable. In a quiet moment, Daniel decided he couldn't wait any longer. He pulled Lila aside, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk," he said, his words almost a whisper. Lila looked at him, her face etched with concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. Daniel took a deep breath, struggling to steady himself. "No, it's not," he admitted. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending." Lila's eyes widened in alarm. "What do you mean, Daniel?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The contract," Daniel began, then interrupted himself. "I don't care about the contract anymore," he said, surprising himself with the truth of his own words. "I care about you. These past few months have changed me. You've changed me." Lila stood silent, her lips parted in shock. Daniel continued, his words spilling out in a rush. "I thought I could keep this professional, but I can't. My feelings for you are real, Lila. I can't keep lying to everyone, to you, to myself." He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on Mr. Harrison, who was watching them with a keen interest. Daniel felt a mix of fear and resolve. He knew what he had to do. He had to be honest about their arrangement, even if it meant facing the consequences. He took a deep breath and walked toward Mr. Harrison, his heart pounding in his chest. The room fell quiet as people sensed that something important was about to happen. Daniel cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Mr. Harrison, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart, "I have something I need to confess." Lila stood frozen, her eyes wide with a mix of concern and confusion. She watched as Daniel took another deep breath before continuing. "When Lila and I first got engaged, it wasn't real," Daniel admitted, his words causing a ripple of gasps through the crowd. "It was a business arrangement designed to improve my image and help secure the government contract." The room erupted in hushed whispers and shocked expressions. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows shot up, his face a mix of surprise and disappointment. Daniel held up his hand, silencing the murmurs. But then something unexpected happened. Daniel's voice softened as he turned to look at Lila. I fell in love. Truly, deeply in love, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Lila showed me a world beyond profits and power. She taught me about community, about the joy of helping others, about the beauty of art and creativity. And in doing so, she stole my heart. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as Daniel's heartfelt words washed over her. The room was silent now, everyone hanging on his every word. Daniel declared, I stand before you not as a businessman trying to secure a deal, but as a man in love. I don't care about the contract anymore. I only care about Lila, and I hope she can forgive me for how this all started. Daniel turned back to Mr. Harrison, his shoulders squared, his resolve firm. I understand if this disqualifies me from the contract, he said, but I couldn't continue living a lie, not when my feelings for Lila are so real. The room remained silent, the tension palpable. All eyes turned to Lila, who stood rooted to the spot, her expression a mix of shock, confusion, and something else, something that looked a lot like hope. Lila stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as Daniel's words echoed in her ears. The room buzzed with whispers and gasps, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was reeling, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. She looked at Daniel, whose eyes were filled with a vulnerability she had never seen before. The man who had once seemed so cold and calculating now stood before her, raw and exposed. Lila felt a surge of conflicting emotions wash over her. Slowly she turned and walked out of the room, needing space to think. She found herself in a quiet hallway, leaning against the wall for support. Her hands trembled as she took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Lila closed her eyes, remembering the past few months. She thought about how Daniel had changed, how he had slowly opened up to the world of art and community she cherished. She recalled the moments when she had seen glimpses of a kinder, more compassionate man beneath his tough exterior. But doubt crept in, whispering in her ear. Could she really trust him after all their relationship had started with a lie? How could she be sure his feelings were genuine now? Her mind drifted to the art center and the joy she had seen on Daniel's face as he helped the children with their projects. She remembered how he had listened intently when she spoke about her dreams and how his eyes had softened when she shared her struggles. Her heart ached with the realization that somewhere along the way she had fallen for him too. Despite her initial wariness and the unusual circumstances of their arrangement, she had come to care deeply for Daniel. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as she grappled with her feelings. She wanted to believe Daniel, to trust that his love was real. But fear held her back, reminding her of the pain she had experienced in the past. Lila took a shaky breath and wiped away a tear that had escaped. She knew she needed time to sort through her emotions and decide if she could take the risk of opening her heart fully to Daniel. Daniel's footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as he approached Lila, his heart racing and his palms clammy. For the first time in his life, the confident businessman felt truly nervous. Lila looked up as he drew near, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. Daniel stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "Lila," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I know this all started as a business arrangement, and I can't blame you if you hate me for that." He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "But somewhere along the way, something changed. You changed me. Lila, you showed me a world I never knew existed, a world full of beauty and compassion." Lila watched Daniel quietly, her face hard to read. Daniel spoke quickly, as if he was scared he might lose his bravery. "I don't care about the contract anymore," he said. "What matters is you, Lila. Your passion, kindness, and strength have touched me in ways I never thought possible." He took a small step closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness or trust, but I want you to know my feelings for you are real. You mean more to me than any business deal." I've spent my life chasing success and power, thinking they would make me happy, but it was all empty. Lila, it's you who has given my life meaning. You've shown me what really matters." Daniel paused, his heart beating loudly. "I love you, Lila, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you if you give me a chance." Lila listened to Daniel, her heart racing. She saw the truth in his eyes and the sincerity in his voice. It was a side of him she had never seen before, and it moved her deeply. She took a deep breath and said softly but firmly, "What you did hurt me and made me question everything we've been through." Daniel's face fell, but Lila wasn't done. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "But I've seen you change. I've seen you care about the art center and the community. That wasn't fake, it was real." A glimmer of hope appeared in Daniel's eyes. Lila reached out and took his hand, surprising both of them. "I believe you when you say your feelings are real," she said, "and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have feelings for you too." Daniel's breath caught, and he gently squeezed her hand, afraid to break the moment. "But if we're going to do this," Lila said, her voice growing stronger, "we need to start fresh. No more contracts, no more pretending, just us as equals, figuring it out together." Daniel nodded eagerly, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, absolutely," he said. "That's all I want, a real chance with you." Lila smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up her face. "Then let's start over," she said. "No billionaire, no hired fiancé, just Daniel and Lila getting to know each other for real." Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders and returned her smile, feeling warmth in his chest. "I'd like that very much," he said softly. As they stood there, hand in hand, they both knew this was just the beginning. They had challenges ahead, trust to rebuild, and a relationship to nurture. But for the first time, they were facing it together, not as part of a business deal, but as two people ready to explore the possibility of love. Over the weeks, Daniel and Lila spent more time at the Community Art Center. They worked side by side, combining their strengths to breathe new life into the once struggling place. Daniel's business skills helped with operations and funding, while Lila's artistic vision and connection with the community guided their efforts. One sunny morning, they stood outside the freshly painted building, a bright banner above announcing the grand reopening. "I can't believe we did it," Lila said, her eyes shining with pride. Daniel squeezed her hand. "You did it, Lila. I just helped a little." Lila shook her head, smiling at him. "We did it together. That's what makes it special." As they cut the ribbon and welcomed the community inside, both felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The art center buzzed with energy as people explored the new space and signed up for classes. In the following weeks, Layla spent more time in the studio, picking up her paintbrush again with Daniel's encouragement. She rediscovered her passion for art. Daniel watched her work, amazed at how her face lit up. He realized that supporting her dreams was the greatest gift he could give, much more valuable than any business deal. Their relationship grew, built on respect and shared values. They learned from each other daily, Daniel teaching Lila about financial stability and Lila showing Daniel the importance of creativity and community. Together, they made the Art Center a beacon of hope. They were no longer just business partners, but true partners in life, united in their desire to make a positive impact on the world. Do you think a relationship that starts with a lie can become truly genuine, like Daniel and Lila's story? Yes or no? Let me know. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I spend hours writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support keeps me going.